Hey, it's Andrew here, and welcome to the eCommerceFuel podcast, the show dedicated to helping 7 and 8-figure e-commerce store owners build incredible businesses and amazing lives. And today on the show, joined by one of my favorite people in eCommerceFuel and just in general, Dana Jaunzemis. She is one of the very earliest members of eCommerceFuel, an incredible entrepreneur, very shrewd, very smart. The founder of picturehangsolutions.com, homehealthtesting.com for a number of years. She was our M&A kind of expert inside of eCommerceFuel, has a tremendous amount of experience and skill in buying businesses, especially businesses that didn't, maybe weren't seeing their full potential, building them up and then selling them. Just a really impressive e-commerce career, and someone who over the last couple of years has stepped away from business, kind of sold the businesses that she owned, and spent some time in what I'll call retirement. I'm not sure she calls it that, but really has taken a break, probably a permanent break, or at least a very extended one. And so many times we hear the story of people selling their business and deeply regretting it, and it was their baby in their life, and they wish they could get it back. And that's not the case with Dana. And I think it's a very refreshing counter narrative to one we often hear in the entrepreneurial world. And so I wanted to bring her on to talk about that whole experience, how she thought about selling it, what the process was like, but most importantly, what life after business is like, and what she loves about it, what she misses about it. So we're going to get deep on all those things. But Dana, welcome. Good to have you on. And I'm excited for this discussion because I always love talking to you. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. Great to be back.
When did you decide to sell? And then how did you figure out you had enough? Like, kind of tied together, but what was the trigger that made you said, I think I'm done? And then also on the financial side, the calculus that you did to say, okay, I think this is enough to be done. So if you could go into both of those.
So it was definitely the pandemic, no doubt. I mean, it was March, April. First thought of it in May 2020. And it was after we'd spent, 2 months pretty much at home. Everything was going smooth in the business. We transitioned fine. And I had spent more time at home than I had ever had. And I didn't have the distractions of doing other things, filling that time. And it was the very first time in my career. And it hit me like a gut level intuition of, you could be done. You could just do this for a while. And because I really enjoyed those months at home, and I'd never had it was like a practice round, where I got to be something a little bit different. And so then I calculated, obviously I know what my business would probably be worth. And I always keep my business in the form of being ready to sell once I get to a certain point. So it wasn't like I needed a year's runway to think about selling. And I did the calculation, and I went to my wife and I said, if I sold, this is what we have. I think it's enough. And for me, enough meant I already knew what our what we spend without budgeting. I just, about every 3 to 5 years, I add it up. I don't do it every year. I'm not a budgeter, but I'll ask her for all of her total spent on credit card. I'll take my total spent on credit card, and then, whatever the rest of the household budget is, and just say, that's what we spend in our normal lives. And when I sold the business, I mean, I had more than enough to spend that without earning any more money. I mean, our money doesn't even have to grow, which is wonderful. So
how do you do the calculus on the return though? Do you do like a 4% rule? I know a lot of advisors are like, hey, you can pull 4%.
No, I took my net worth divided by how long I think I'll live. And did that provide me the money I need to earn for the rest of my life? Our household.
So even if you were drawing it completely down, just kind of a life.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Got it.
I did not add in Social Security. I didn't add in my rent income. I didn't add in investment income. And that's actually why I know it's enough in my mind. Someone would argue with that and say I didn't account for inflation or, but when you have no debt, your house is paid for, you're not really actively accumulating assets at this stage of life, you
Hmm.
can kind of skip the whole inflation argument in my mind because you're not acquiring a lot, especially if your house is paid for.
And I know you're a huge Bitcoiner, so you've got that hedge against
Yeah.
inflation too,
Oh,
right?
yeah. Right.
I tease because data is probably safe to say you're pretty risk adverse person.
Very risk averse.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
So to me, enough was I don't even have to grow this money and we can maintain the same standard of living we've had for a decade or more. I mean, we just don't, and that wouldn't work for everybody. If you had a different lifestyle than me, maybe that wouldn't work. But if you needed like a whole bunch of new toys or a new things, but I actually, in all honesty, there's enough for that too because I still do have a commercial building and I have rent income. And I actually try to get us to waste all of our rent income because I'm not a good waster of money. I don't spend frivolously. So sometimes I'm just like, why don't we just spend all the rent this month? Which, I
with
mean,
something super fun that you've done with that, because I can relate to that as well, being like always trying to be intentional about it and careful with it. So what's any fun anecdotes of things that you've just been like that you never normally would have done, but like kind of when you took your brain and disconnected it and been like, I have these extra funds. If I don't spend them, it's not like, I mean, maybe well, you could definitely, you give them away and do other useful things with them, but you also could use them and have some enjoyment with them right now, given your financial position.
yeah,
And any
sadly, I
fun
don't.
things like,
I don't. I'm trying to think if there was any. I mean, I think it's a little bit more on little stuff along the way, like nothing big. I will say that. Um, I'm drawing a blank on that, but I have more freedom in buying new books or things that I shop for online, things that I art supplies. I have more freedom in the little bits I spend here and there, and I don't. And part of that was also entering this stage of gap year or retirement, and there isn't money coming in, so I didn't want to become one of those frugal people that acts like I don't have anything. So I try to encourage myself and my wife to occasionally waste some money. But
do you have that?
it's not on a big scale though.
Yeah. Do you have that mindset? I mean, I've heard, and I can definitely see how this would be the case. If you do sell, you have a lump sum, you're retired, even though it can generate cash, there's something psychological about not having new money come in, and you're spending, and even if your net worth like doubles or triples, or you've got a good chunk, uh, just the fact that it's not being replenished at the tops for some people, I think, is a psychological little shoe in there, or rock in their shoe, so to speak.
Yeah.
Did you find that was the case or not really?
It wasn't for me, and that actually shocked me because I thought it would be. I thought I would panic, and I tried to just like keep the information at hand so I could like touch it and see it. But I don't think there's even been one time that it's crossed my mind. It's like that actually shocked me because I expected a little bit of a problem with that.
Hmm.
But I think I must really believe I have enough. And even if I'm wrong, and I think a lot of times when people talk about doing something like this, and I've heard you say this before, where it's binary. Like you think you put yourself in a corner that if you do this, you can never return. You can't change your mind. And for me, I think the greatest safety is I know I can buy another business if that's what I wanted to do.
Hmm.
Unlike a founder, maybe if you retired and had created some amazing product or service, you'd think, well, I don't know that I could do that again. I know I can buy another business, and even a local business if I didn't want to do online anymore, I could buy some local service business if that's what I wanted to do. So I think that brings me great comfort in that I have enough, I think, anyway. But even if I didn't, I'd just buy another small business.
Yeah, I think it's easy to be very fatalistic and be like, oh well, to be able to retire and take the gas off, or maybe shift what I either take more time away or just shift what I want to work on, that I have to have everything covered for all eternity, and
Right.
I'm never going to work again. But like, that's just not the case. Like
It's not.
most people are going to be productive in one sense of another, or could be if they chose to be, right, in terms of
Right.
economically. And anyway, so yeah, I think it's very easy to want, you don't have to be at 100% totally, hey, if I'm, in a coma for the rest of my life, I'll be provided for, before you can start making decisions maybe that aren't 100% fueled by, economic
Right.
reasons. Yeah.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think we
So,
back ourselves in that corner a lot, with even
mhm.
with the question of if I sell my business, and sometimes there are times earlier in my career with other businesses, I should have sold them earlier. They were worth more years before I sold them. And I should have. And I think that was also on my mind with Picture Hang, was I knew my own personal track record was maybe the next few years it wouldn't grow as much, and because the previous two hadn't. And I was just like, you could come back. It's not, you could just try this. I think that was my mentality, was, is there there's no harm in trying. If it doesn't work, then start the whole process again, which my favorite part is buying more than selling. I love the acquisition process because I just find that so fun. So if that's my penalty box, that I have to go back and do that, that's cool.
It could be way worse. Yeah.
Right. That's
Yeah.
just not bad.
So what was, talked a lot about, like, kind of decision and a little bit of the catalyst, but what's life been like post sale? Give us kind of a day. What are the things that you really deeply enjoy, that you have found you have time and space for, that you didn't before? Yeah, in general, what's life like after sale, and kind of not planning on necessarily coming back to the business world?
I think the biggest surprise for me was the kind of the mental space, because it felt like a computer reboot, like all my cache and my RAM got cleared out, and
Mm-hmm.
I had a lot more mental playground. Um, I'm an avid reader, always have been, but I haven't probably had the mental capacity to pull at every thread. Like if I read something interesting in this book, then to read that, these unrelated topics and go down these trails. And now I can. And that has been super inspiring. And I'm on different subjects. I'm doing art history. I do a lot of Eastern philosophy, meditation. So all these topics that have always interested me, but my business brain would always hijack, my time or my thought process. So that openness in my head has been the biggest surprise. And that I actually do know, if I went back into business, I know, to me it's an addictive thing. You know, if you're good at something, you get rewarded. It's the whole cycle. You get in the virtuous cycle of the reward system, and it feels good, and it would take over, because that's, and maybe if I do this long enough, I could go back in business and it wouldn't take over. I'd find a better balance. I think I might be able to later. But the surprise for me was just the bandwidth in my head, the bandwidth to have ideas. And I'm like, where'd that come from? Because I
What was it?
just,
Would you have a level of, I don't know if guilt is the right term, but maybe it is. Like, if, like, you mentioned a topic, like, say, art history, you wanted to really go deep on this, but then you also think, oh, I should be doing X or Y for my business. Or was there a level of just guilt, or just time that you didn't have, that was, even if, kind of that old maxim that, like, work will expand to fill the space you give it, kind of thing. Because you had a business, you felt like your brain always needed to be on in that kind of capacity. So, was that one of the things that's been removed and given you the space to explore all these other things?
yeah. And for me, it wasn't guilt when I had a business. It was truly passion for it. I mean, that I was so excited about it that it always took over my thoughts.
Hmm.
So, and I couldn't balance other things that, and when you're learning something new, it's harder, even art history, or, learning an entirely new subject. it's always harder in the beginning. So your confidence isn't there, and it's harder to hold your attention. Where in business, my mind can go there really easy because it's a playground that I'm comfortable in and I do well in. So I think it was more like a habitual, a little bit of an addict brain. I mean, just where it's just, I got my dopamine fixes in business and that's where I like to stay. And so that makes it scary too. Then if you leave, but that was the surprise, was when you took that out of my brain was really happy to play in other subjects, like
Hmm.
really happy. So that I
What, what
didn't foresee that.
what do you miss most from your entrepreneurial life? I'm sure there's some things that you do miss. What are those, and how are you trying to supplement for those?
Productivity. I was, a productivity junkie in that I really love the feeling at the end of the day of getting it all done, or, tackling the big project, or, whatever it may be, even if it's all the little projects, but getting all the way through them all and finishing it. I will say the beginning of my gap year, productivity was my hardest thing
Hmm.
because there was no, what was I going to be productive at, you know? So I actually had to, for a while, keep a little journal of the things I did every day, because I would get to the end of the day and I'd be like, I don't have anything to show for my time.
Hmm.
So I had to learn that. I had to learn how to figure that out for myself, of what, what's going to feel good, what's going to be my own reward system. And that was hard. That was the hardest part, I think. One of the hardest parts. And you know how you can, even on a bad day at work, you can like just do task and still feel good about it. You might be like, yeah, I'm not into it today, but I can get something done. But when you
Hmm.
have just a low energy day and you have no business to funnel some of that into, it can feel lazy. I mean, I actually have more guilt. I don't think I had very much guilt when I was in business. I have more guilt now that I'm retired, because I'm like, what are you doing? What do you have to say for yourself? And
Yeah.
that takes some unwinding. I mean, you got to figure
Uh-huh.
that out.
Yeah. So what have you been pouring your time into? I know a few things, but what do you spend? What has replaced business for you in your life?
So reading new subjects, doing art, more time meditating, gardening. I love gardening, and I had outsourced a lot. Not the meditating. I had outsourced my gardening. um, when I was busy in business, because it didn't make sense to be home weeding the garden, but I really like weeding the garden. I really enjoy that. And it's time consuming. But so I don't, here's the hard thing about it. This is the second hardest thing about retirement, is when people say, what are you doing with your time? You really
Hmm.
don't have a good answer. That's
Hmm.
and that's kind of crappy. I mean, some people do. Probably the people who are hard charging and come in retirement and try to tackle it like a business. And I kind of entered it with this idea that I'm going to just sit in this uncomfortable space and see what happens. And it makes it not very reportable. Everyday ordinary stuff is what I do. And I
So when
like it.
when people ask you what you do you say I'm retired? Do you kind of get into the details of the day? And is that a hard question? Because
It is
I
a
think
hard question.
as a store owner, it's a hard question, right? Because
Yeah.
it's I could be like, oh, I've been doing this for 15 years, and I still feel like I'm maybe a little better at explaining what I do to people, but not great.
Yeah.
And and I think most niche store owners or entrepreneurs online would have be able to relate to this to some degree. So, but I'm in your shoes, I imagine it's also challenging sometimes.
Yeah. And it depends on the audience, because, I can go to a local event here and see other retired people and they say, what do you do? And you can say retired. I can go to eCommerceFuel event live and I better come up with a better story, you know, because it is hard. I think and that goes back to your identity. We suit up over 30 years of being in business and put on the armor and, all the identity of being an entrepreneur, and that's a long time. And then to just stop, you have to decide, well, what I'm trying to have no identity. And that's really hard because I don't know what it is. And
Yeah.
and I'm okay with that. Does that make sense? It sounds like I'm losing my marbles though, if I say it out loud, but I'm not. That's where I'm trying to sit in it and just figure it out. And I still could say I haven't figured it all the way out. Like, I know I'm not going to do what I'm doing right now for the rest of my life. I'm going to do something that has some meaning and productivity. I don't think it'll be business, but I'm not sure what it'll be, but I'm going to find it. It might just be that I'm an artist, which would be fine, but I think there's even going to be more than that. And I don't know if it's going to be social entrepreneurship or nonprofit work or what, but there's going to be another version. It's just I haven't decided what it is yet. And I think after a long career, you're okay floating for a while.
Mm-hmm. What about personal connections, other entrepreneurs, the social connections that come with entrepreneurship? Because that's a huge component as well. So um, how was that for you as you moved from kind of work into a different space?
Yeah, that was hard. Even my staff at the office, because I liked everyone I worked with, and then to stop going, to just see them, I miss them. But my other, e-commerce folks, my mastermind, and then, when I attend the live events and the people I know, that was really hard. And I sat out for a bit, and then I came back this year because it was too painful. I wanted those relationships. I didn't want them to wither. And I'd kind of found a way, I tried to leave my mastermind, and my mastermind is all on Slack. So we don't talk or meet. It's just a Slack group that's ongoing. And I didn't think they would be honest with me if I asked them if I could stay. So I left the group. You can just disconnect from a group in Slack. So I just disconnected. I wrote them a really nice note, and then I disconnected. And they
Like
all
drop
emailed me, and
out.
they're like, "What the heck? What are you doing?" And I'm like, I'm not going to be keeping up. It's not. You don't need me here." And so they let me be for about 2 weeks, and then they sent me a list of all the reasons I had to come back. And I was so happy because I missed them. I mean, that was a daily part of my life to know what was going on in their worlds. So I am back in that group, and I'm happy to be. I mean, I'm
Are
not in
there
there as much as I used to be, but I still catch up with them all the time.
Yeah, so hard to you can't untangle the two. Like I think about so many friendships I have through business or eCommerceFuel or yeah, and it's just they're very intermingled. Are there what things don't you care about? Like what are things that you think about now that you used to stress out about a lot or think about a lot that like now that you don't necessarily have a business and your focus is on other things that you don't care at all about and you're kind of surprised that it took up so much mental space before? Are there some things that you see on occasion like, oh yeah, I used to worry about it all the time and I was kind of ridiculous for giving it that much attention?
Advertising. I don't miss advertising at all. Managing ad budgets and advertising, I do not miss one iota at all. When I see, even like in the forum, and I see, something's happening with Facebook or something's happening with, any of the platforms, I
Hmm.
don't miss that at all. That feeling that, everything could crash with one change.
Hmm.
But that's just the risk of business. But managing your ads and your ad budget, even when I would source it out, it still just was like it was a big component of online business. And I guess it really wasn't the part I liked the most. Like I like strategy, but that was somewhere between strategy and execution that I didn't care for. So I don't
Interesting.
miss that.
Yeah. Um, how do you think about investing the money that you have now? A couple caveats. I know you're very risk adverse. I know you mentioned kind of during your gap year before you kind of decided, hey, this is going to be more permanent, and or at least adopted the retirement label. How do you think about do you have it all in? Do you just put it in low cost index funds? Do you still keep it in primarily in just savings accounts, given risk tolerances? Like, how do you think about, or do you just not even worry about it and kind of keep it super low risk so you don't have to worry about it from a mental space?
I do keep it super low risk. I've been obviously thrilled with the interest rate changes because that was huge.
Yeah.
So I've gotten like a 4x raise for doing nothing over the last few months. So I do money markets, and I've finally gotten into, based on somebody talking about it in the forum. I didn't know about brokered CDs, and I just think they're just amazing. So now I have brokered CDs through Vanguard and Fidelity, and I've started doing treasuries as well. So no, I'm super low risk. I mean, I have money. I have my retirement. My simple IRA in the stock market is, but that the bulk though of my money is super just CDs, money markets, treasuries.
So when you say brokered CDs, can you talk about what that means a little bit more? What's the difference between a brokered CD and just a regular CD, which I think most people are familiar with?
You can buy them through a brokerage and you don't have to open an account at the bank, which is awesome. So if you're
Ah,
worried about having money over the FDIC limit and you split your money into multiple banks, and you have to manage all those bank accounts, that feels a little fraught with risk as well, because you've got multiple accounts. And um, so a brokered CD you can buy from different banks through Vanguard or Fidelity and still get the bank's FDIC insurance. So you can have four different $500,000 brokered CDs all through Vanguard and not have four different bank accounts. But you have FDIC
ah,
insurance on each of them, and you can do short-term ones, 3 month, 6 month, 12 month. And most of the time, they're rates that the bank is not paying at their bank. So you know how like Wells Fargo's just famous for, super low rates on everything in the bank. But you'll
super
see
low
brokered,
everything.
yeah, you'll see brokered CDs through Vanguard with Wells Fargo when they need to raise cash or deposits for going rates for 4.5, 4.8, 5%. So I learned all of that in the forum because there's just great threads on how do you manage this and that. And people are so kind and helpful and do little videos for you so you can figure out how to do it. And so that's been, and I just started doing that this year because I'm out of my gap year, and I actually really didn't want to think about it during my gap year. So I wasn't doing any investigating of different things. I just put it all in money markets and let it be. But with the rising rates, it's definitely worth, doing something different because you're looking at 1 to 2% higher. Like most money markets are paying 3, but these brokered CDs and treasuries are closer to 5. That's
Wow.
big. That's a big difference.
Yeah, it's a big difference. And one thing that was, I mean, you reached out to me about coming to ECF Live this last year, and so glad you did. And it kind of came under a new program that you helped inspire and create, which is called the ECF Alumni Program. And with the idea being that we've got members like yourself, and increasingly you're going to continue to have more and more as we get, as we just continue to grow and the community gets more mature, that have been in business, that have a lot of meaningful, deep experience, have moved on to a different new chapter, but still want to stay connected to friends that they've made in the community, but also have a lot to offer, especially other entrepreneurs. Maybe not on the most recent update to to Facebook or TikTok or whatever it is, but there's so many things in business from a leadership perspective, from a judgment perspective, from a risk tolerance perspective, so many things that are evergreen that you can really help other people. And so it was cool. It was amazing having you there this year, because this alumni program for members like yourself, we're going to be having members that have a lot of those attributes, and especially that have been plugged into the community for a meaningful amount of time and contributed a lot, like you have. You've been phenomenal. They can be in the community, that can come to some of the events and still kind of be that, yeah, just be a real bastion of wisdom for a lot of the other members, which I think is super cool. So thank you for the idea for that, and thank you for being willing to
Well,
stick
thank
around. And
you for letting me come back. I felt kind of odd, like my hat in my hand to say, "Is there any chance?" But I kept looking at the checkout on the live event, and I was like, "Man, that spouse ticket looks really good." I just want to go to breakfast and I want to go to the parties. And I didn't want to take a seat from somebody who was growing their business to be in the sessions during the day. So I appreciate your openness to even consider it. I don't like to,
no,
I don't like being the exception and saying, "Can you do something for me?" But I wanted to come that bad. So I did. And
no,
I thank
you've
you.
been. Oh, of course, you've been, and excited to have you for years, hopefully in the future. But yeah, we've
But I
got. So
know
if
there's
you,
going to be more of these conversations because there's people, a few years behind me that are going to be thinking, well, what's it like? What's it like to
mhm.
try this retirement thing? What's it like to exit? How do you know when it's enough? And those are always the rich conversations we have at the live events because you might not type it in the forum.
Mhm.
But that's the kind of conversations we have is something that's whatever's on your mind and you find the person that's done it. That's the beauty of the group you created.
And if you're in e-commerce fuel and you're listening and you're kind of coming into a similar or maybe coming into a similar chapter of your life, reach out to myself or Patrick and let us know because we are building up an alumni program for members just like Dana who've been in the community for a while, have meaningfully connected and contributed and would like to stick around post business and are also willing to be able to chime in and maybe help help mentor or connect with other members as well that could use their advice from time to time. So let us know, and it's something we're going to be building on in the future. So, Dana, last question for you before we get into our lightning round here. Let's say, imagine there's someone listening, and almost certainly there is, who maybe they're not quite ready for retirement, but they're also feeling like, man, I feel like I've let business take over too much of maybe my mental space, of my health, of my family life. Because like our whole tagline here, and this is important to me, is like helping entrepreneurs build amazing businesses and incredible lives. And like, I think we over index on the business side too much so often. So you've been on the other side where you've been completely, business has not been part of the equation. What are maybe a couple ways you could answer it? What are maybe one or two of the richest things that you have enjoyed on the other side of that you wish you could have brought over to your business side? Or maybe a different way to answer it is how, like, what advice would you give them if they don't want to full on sell and retire, or maybe, very, very likely chance they can't sell and retire at the moment. Like any way you can try to get as much of the best of both worlds as you can from your perspective. Any thoughts?
I think if I could go back in time and try to advise myself, I would have said, let some of it go. Don't be so productive. Don't feel the need to always trying to be your best at everything. I think I've gotten, because I'm not doing things that I'm great at right now, which is good. And that's good for your soul. And I think we get to a place in business, or I think in any career, you probably get there if you've climbed, a ladder of in a corporate world or anything, you get to a point where you keep working in your same strengths and your wheelhouse, and that's good. And that's honestly, that's what I told myself to do, and that I would make more progress doing that. The problem with it is you lose some level of excitement. You lose the messy place of sitting there not knowing what to do, learning something new. And that's really invigorating. And I think I had lost some of that. And that if I could go back and tell myself, I would be like, just do some of your hobbies that you really suck at and don't not do those and pull the weeds in your garden because that's what you like to do. And that last 10% that you're being so freaking productive, just don't. It wouldn't have mattered. And I think if I could go back, that's what I would try to tell myself is just give yourself some slack. You're going to get there. you know I, that would be my advice. Just give yourself some slack. It's just not, everything's not that important you know
That's really good. That's really good advice. One thing I've noticed is, still very much building a business, having a family with 3 kids, like, and doing all the things we try to do, like on any given week, if I'm lucky, I'll have maybe 5 hours of free time, maybe if I'm lucky. Right. So, And I thought about this, and some of the days where if I clock out and end by 4 o'clock and go and get an extra hour, hour and a half with a family or friends, whatever it is, if you do that, that's 1 hour, but that's like a 20% boost in your free time for the week for 1 hour, right? You double
Yeah.
that. If you do that every day, you double the free time you have in a week with 5 hours. So anyway, I've been thinking more about that in terms of sometimes very small changes in terms of, stepping away just a little bit earlier can have, in absolute terms, they're small, but in relative terms of how much space you have to do other things, they can be a massive increase, which I think is kind
Yeah.
of cool. So
Yeah, I agree with that. I think if you can add 30 minutes a day, or an hour a day, that's huge. That's really huge. And there's a great quote that I keep on my bulletin board by Gretchen Rubin, who wrote The Happiness Project, and it's what you do every day, not what you do once in a while, that contributes to
mm,
your happiness. And it's true. We think it's
mhm.
like the big trip or the big, milestone in business when you get over this level or when you sell, and you think it's all those things, but really what it is that every day. It's the everyday stuff that brings us meaning, fulfillment, and happiness.
Yeah. Dana, would love to cap this off with a lightning round. So I think you know how it goes. I'm going to fire a handful of questions at you and get your thoughts.
All right.
So feel free to be punchy and just super short with them. But first question, I usually ask, how would you describe the e-commerce environment right now in 1 to 3 words? I'm going to say, how would you describe the retirement environment right now in 1 to 3 words?
Reflective, mindful, and open.
What's one of your fondest memories from your childhood?
Waiting for my dad to come home from work. I would walk to the corner and sit on the drain pipe or whatever at the corner there, and his little car would come around the corner and pick me up. I love that.
Nice. You live in North Carolina right now. If you weren't living in Wilmington, where would you live?
Probably somewhere in the southeast, maybe not on the coast. Um, I guess I'll throw out Greenville, South Carolina, but I've never even been there. But it's on my list to maybe go look at. So I would probably stay in this region, but get off the coast.
What's your favorite painting that you did recently?
I've done an encaustic painting, which is a wax painting of some bluebirds. That's probably one that I'm most proud of, as far as it's displayed in the house. But I do a lot of collage work. I'm looking over at one, sorry, of book covers. And I take vintage book covers and cut them up and make the collages out of them. And I did one that's titled Time Flies, and it's my favorite piece I've done.
Oh, cool. Very cool. What was the hardest business you ever ran? I mean, you've owned numerous businesses over the years, done a lot of different things. What was the hardest one you've ever run?
Site Clean. I had a business. It was my first startup, and it was a construction debris recycling company. So I had dump trucks and bobcats, and we picked up all the waste on a new home construction and then recycled as much of it as we could. I only owned it for about 3 years and I sold it because I really, really despised it.
What is it do you think makes you so risk adverse? I mean, I'm very similar that way. We joke about that a lot. What is it that makes you more risk adverse than more be risk prone?
Early on, it was because I had no safety net whatsoever. So I didn't have family support, and I didn't have, I had zero safety net, as in I was near bankruptcy a good part of my early, like in my 20s and stuff, and I just had no support system. So that was originally why I was risk averse. And so I thought that I would get away from that when I became successful. I thought, wow, when I have money, I'm going to really be able to, do all these things because I can buy multiple businesses and do all these things. But then the opposite happened, and I enjoyed the security. I found it so nice to have the security that I couldn't imagine risking what I had for something I didn't have. So, and that is kind of how I still look at it. Like if I really have to want something a lot to risk something I already have to trade it for something I don't have. And most of the time, for most things, I can talk myself out of it because I'm like, you don't need that business. What's that going to do for you? You know, so I've become more risk averse as I've had more that I could risk, which was a surprise to myself.
That's interesting. I heard somebody say something. Maybe it was Ramit Sethi, something along the lines of people's attitudes about money or willingness to spend money or how much they think they have has almost zero correlation with how much money they actually have. Like I think about,
Right.
yeah, like my grandmother, she grew up in the Depression, and I think actually her father actually owned a bank that went under in the Great Depression, and like a very hard time for her growing up and her family.
Yeah.
And as she in her last few years, like she was very comfortable, but still like checked the stocks every day, was very thrifty. And which is there's a lot of value in thrift, but it's also, man, it is hard to change your thoughts around money. Um, I don't want to say impossible, but it's amazingly how powerful they are,
Yeah.
the life experiences that you have in terms of how they shape the way you think about money.
Right. And
Yeah.
I think if anybody thinks if they think they want to try selling their business and living without an income, whether you call it retirement or not, you really need to work on your money attitudes beforehand because it will. And I have always been fascinated by that subject. Like money and happiness are two subjects that I've read a lot over my whole life. And so I feel like I probably dealt with some of those demons earlier. But if you never have like really thought about how money makes you feel, then you might want to tackle that subject before you enter retirement because it can mess with you. And I feel like
Yeah.
because I really had studied that a lot, and my favorite book is that Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel.
Such a
I
good
just
book.
love that book because he just spells it out. Like he calls it what it is and makes you think about these subjects. And that one could trip a lot of people up in retirement, I think.
Yeah, I think you introduced me to that book. Phenomenal book. I've recommended it a lot on the show in the past. If you have not read it, I mean, I studied finance in school. I'm kind of a finance geek. I love it, and I've read a lot of finance books. It's the best finance book I think I have ever read, and not
Yeah.
because it's like very academic, but because it's so approachable and yeah. One of the things he talked about in there I thought was so true. He's like, "What? There are almost no careers across any field where you could say an amateur could beat the professional just based on their mindset or their behaviors. Professional sports, architecture, oil drilling, whatever it is. But if you look at personal finance, it happens all the time where people that just are amateurs based on just their habits and their mindset are able to win against the professionals. And I thought that
Right.
was so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
All
I
right.
feel
Last.
like that book is really good for entrepreneurs too, because even though it's not tactical on the finance, it's all about mindset. And I think so
Mhm.
many subjects he covered in there really are how we feel about our businesses, because he talks about enough a lot. He talks about risk and, what are you risking things for? And I think a lot of that applies to business.
Yeah, phenomenal read. I can't recommend it enough. Last question, Dana. Who's an interesting and notable person you have met through eCommerceFuel? This is not the most interesting, notable, or the most notable person, but just someone that when you think of an interesting, notable person comes to mind for whatever reason that you've met, either the
Lars
forums or
Hundley.
events or Lars Hundley.
Lars Hundley, yes. I met him at the very first e-commerce fuel in Austin, Texas. And this is really funny. I had from the beginning, from years before I met him, I had an article that he was in Inc. magazine, and it had a full page picture of him. I had it in one of my files. When I met him, I went home and I took a picture of it and I emailed it to him. I was like, just so you know, I had this article it was from like 6 years prior to that, of him with a little reel mower in Inc. magazine. So believe it or not, to me, at that first event, it was like meeting a celebrity because he was in Inc. magazine and that felt celebrity like to me.
Yeah, that's
Isn't that
awesome.
funny?
That's really, so you had, that's amazing. You met him for the first, what made you tuck away that little article? Did you just remember it, or what
Because
was it
I
that
can
made you?
remember it clear as day. I was on a plane going somewhere and I had my Inc. magazine with me and I was looking for a business for sale. I was in the market for a business and I hadn't really thought of e-commerce because it was so new. And his story, they talked about how he was doing it. It was just a great little story. And I was just like, no, that's cool. That's really cool. And that was in the days when everything wasn't on the internet and you actually tore the magazine out and kept it. You know what I mean? I
Hmm.
don't even, probably Inc. magazine wasn't even on the internet at that time. So,
That's amazing. I had no idea. I mean, known both of you for a decade now, but I had no idea that that's the origin story of how you met. That's really cool.
yeah.
Man. Well, Dana, thank you so much for coming on to talk about this. It's something that doesn't get really talked about a whole lot, or if it does, I think it's few people are talking about it from the level of experience that you have. So congrats on an amazing entrepreneurial career. Thank you for being in the community and such an amazing resource and contributor and friend. And congrats on a very cool retirement / gap year / extended painting extravaganza, whatever you want to define it. But so cool having you on, and looking forward to seeing you. We're going to be in the same place in Florida here in a few weeks here for Seller Summit.
Yeah.
So looking forward to hanging out, and thank you for coming on.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And thanks for a great community that I've been thrilled to be part of for the last decade.
Thanks. It's been amazing having you. So appreciate it.